All right, welcome to the final lecture for week 12. Again, it doesn't matter in what order you watch these, but let's go ahead and dive right in. All right, so this lecture is going to talk about Noggle's article. Let's see, it was a long article. So his article is Integrity, the Self, and Desire-Based Accounts of the Good. So what Noggle is doing in this article is he's actually working on a theory of well-being. So we're going to come to this in a few weeks. There are theorists out there who are working on answering this question of, well, what makes for human beings to have a good life? What makes them to flourish as human beings? So what Noggle is trying to do is answer this question. And along the way, he realizes I've got to talk about what it is to be a self and to have a self. So what we're going to do is observe or just kind of see a snippet of what Noggle thinks it makes up a self and why it's important to well, he thinks just in general, it's important that we respect the integrity of the self of another person. And we'll kind of get to why this is important a little bit later in the lecture. So let me go ahead and share my PowerPoint screen with you. Set the share screen. Noggle and load the self. Go ahead and share that. All right. So let's go ahead and go full screen. All right, so a few more preliminary remarks. This is the view of what it is to be you and not just of what it is to be you over time. This view has consequences for what it is to be the person that you are throughout time, but it's not just to help us kind of answer this strange metaphysical question. This view has importance for other ethical concerns that Noggle is thinking about that aren't quite as strictly metaphysical as what we've been doing. But I think this will be a good examination of someone's view of what constitutes personal identity. All right, so Noggle talks about this thing called integrity. So we want to respect the integrity of other selves. And he thinks that this idea will help us get at what is a self. So he asks, what does it mean to preserve someone's integrity? So he says that we preserve those concerns, attitudes, and other mental states that are constitutive of her identity or herself. So that's just kind of big language for, hey, when we are thinking about who someone else is, when we think about what makes up herself, we think about the things that she cares about, the things that she loves. We think about her attitudes towards certain things. What does she love? What does she hate? What are her concerns? What are her projects? What are the things that she's invested herself in? And what's her attitude towards certain things? And that helps us to see where the person's self lies. Like, where is it that we would say the you of the other person resides? When I'm talking about myself, I would say where I reside, or like where I think what it is to be me, basically. So when you're thinking about what it is for someone to be someone, Noggle thinks that part of what makes that up is your loves, your hates, your beliefs about certain things, your desires. So when we are thinking about what it is for a person to be the same over time, what that implies is that these concerns, these other loves and hates and desires, they've got to stay the same for that person to be the same person. So in other words, when a person changes, her central beliefs and desires remain the same if we're preserving identity. So one of the questions you might see if you are thinking about, okay, well, what does it mean for me to be the same person? Another way to think about the question is, what can change about me and me still be the same? So we didn't talk much about this, but there's a problem called the ship of Theseus. And in this problem, you've got this question of, okay, I've got a ship and I start replacing its parts. And so it's kind of out to sea, it's making this journey. And all along the way, from the time that it leaves the port, all of the pieces are changing until eventually all of the pieces are replaced and it comes back to port. And so then you might wonder, okay, we replaced all of these pieces, is it the same thing? So that's kind of the question about, okay, well, what is it that has to stay the same amid all of the changes that happen to us for us to still be the same person? What are the things that can't change and need to still be Emily, and for you to still be you? So that's kind of what Noggle is trying to help us understand. So, nope, I'm gonna go this way. Okay. So central identity, a person's identity, is maintained when you don't get a different person after the change. So basically, the central beliefs and desires of a person stay the same throughout their changes. So Noggle gives this example about a Jesuit identity versus a neo-Nazi identity. So here's how this goes. So being a philosopher, Noggle being a philosopher, he thinks that there are certain core desires and commitments that he has that are radically different from those of the Jesuit or from those of the neo-Nazi. And so if you were to consider becoming a Jesuit, that would require certain core beliefs and desires about him to change. And you might wonder, okay, if he became a Jesuit, is he still the same person? Because a lot of the core commitments he had as a philosopher, or even just as the person that he had, would be radically different. The one that's a little easier to see is the neo-Nazi change. So if he were to become a neo-Nazi, philosophers very much, especially what Noggle's doing, he's thinking about ethics, right? And so there's a lot of ethical stances of his that would have to change to become a neo-Nazi. So questions about the value of other human life, questions about what is right and what is wrong to do, especially that question of valuing other human life and how we treat other people well. So if you think about it, for Noggle the philosopher to become Noggle the Jesuit or Noggle the neo-Nazi, like a lot of important commitments that Noggle has would have to change, right? A lot of his desires would have to change and a lot of his beliefs. And so then you would wonder, if he became either of those things, is he still the same Noggle that was the philosopher? So this is kind of the question that we want to keep in mind as we go along. All right, so then he proposes that, okay, so we're thinking about, we don't want to change the self of the person. And part of what makes up the self are those commitments and values that we have that reside deep within us. So Noggle's going to talk a little bit of philosophy. So here's what he says. He says, human psychology is constituted by an interlocking network of beliefs, desires, and other attitudes. All right, so I'm going to stop share for just a second. And I'm just going to show you this. So Noggle thinks that you are kind of made up of this network, kind of like a spider web. So think spider web here. And at the corners of all the webs and all these like lines and places, those are like where your beliefs and desires reside. And you have two kinds of beliefs. So you have beliefs that are at the core, and those are the beliefs that make up you. They make you you. And then you've got beliefs that are at the periphery. So they're at the edge of the web of who you are. And so what Noggle is going to end up saying is that the beliefs that are at the edge of the web, those are beliefs that could change and you still be you. But the beliefs at the core are ones that cannot change and you still be you. So my belief that, let's see, my belief that, my false belief that you can drive west to get to New Jersey could still change and I still be me. But my belief or my desire to, I don't know, perhaps to be a philosopher or to have certain religious beliefs that I have, if those were to change, I would change, very much so. And so then Noggle thinks, if someone's core beliefs change, is that person still the same? All right, so let's go back to our PowerPoint. Okay. Let me see if I can get it to go big screen for me. Uh-oh, technical difficulties. Okay, there we go. All right, so again, we've already imagined our web. Beliefs are like the corners of the web, and the strands are what connect your beliefs to one another. So the thought is that I have these really general core beliefs, but they're not really specific as to like, how do I get there? How do I achieve those beliefs? And then the beliefs that are like further out on the web, those are beliefs about, hey, how do I achieve my goals? So there's multiple ways you can achieve certain goals. So maybe you have a value of being honest. And so there's multiple ways, given the situation that you're in, for you to be honest. And so you might have beliefs about what honesty is that change, but you still, at the core of you, are an honest person. All right, so the main idea here is that a core belief or desire is a belief or desire that makes up yourself, who you are. And the stuff at the core, that's what makes you you. That's you. And so what's interesting to note about these core beliefs is that they are the basis for the way that you think about the world and the way that you interpret and filter other information that comes into you. So if you think about what a self is, like you have a certain perspective, you have a certain way that you view the world, and part of what makes up your doing that is having these core beliefs and core desires. So you have values that help you interpret the information that comes to you, so whether you think something's right or wrong. You have desires about the way that you want the world to be, and you interpret, excuse me, the things that happen to you based on the desires that you have. So is something a good thing or a bad thing? Well, it might depend on what you desire for your own life. So your beliefs and your desires help you filter the things that happen to you. Okay. So this is just kind of an reiteration of what we've already talked about. So your central projects, your core values, and hardwired basic motives are centers around which webs of other motivation, other desires or beliefs are woven. So you can think about that core as like the foundation of everything else you do, and all the other stuff that's true of you that's not a core desire is built on all that stuff at the core of you. Beliefs and desires at the core of the web, those are what make up you. You change those and you risk violating the integrity of the individual. So let's see. Beliefs and desires at the edges of the web do not make up you and can change fairly easily, and you don't change. So in Noggle, trying to answer this question that we have when talking about identity as to how much could change, think about an instance of, let's see if I got an example for this one. So let's say I have a core commitment to the intellectual web. I love doing academic work. I love just the project of research. But let's say, for instance, that I wasn't able to get into a philosophy PhD program. So then you might think, oh no, like your core desire has been hindered. But then you might think, well, the core desire here is not that I get into a philosophy PhD program. The core desire here is my love of learning, my love of research, and my pursuit of knowledge. So then if this other desire out here doesn't get fulfilled, well, maybe I could change that. Maybe I could pursue, I don't know, a history MA or something like that. And that would be another way of fulfilling this core desire for intellectual pursuit. So I haven't changed. My core desire is still the same, but the way that I carried it out, getting a history MA versus getting a philosophy PhD, looks a little bit different. So that's the example of a difference between a core desire and then a desire at the edge of the web. So core desires are those things that are like at the very core of you. So desires for intellectual pursuit, desire to be an honest person, desire to have good, loving relationships. Those are central projects that we might have. But the ways that we carry them out might actually differ. And so what makes it the case that the core of a person change would be if I rejected or repudiated maybe a core commitment to be honest or a core commitment to the intellectual life. So if any of those things happened, you might start to ask yourself, well, is she the same person? She's unrecognizable from the person that she was before. She's not honest. She doesn't pursue intellectual pursuits. And so that's at the point, those core things that we value and love, when those begin to change, that's when a core desire begins to change. And that's when we ask questions about, is that the same person? Okay. So here is the big idea. So the self is made up of our projects, our commitments, our values. So a lot of the terminology that Noggle uses, you can just sum it up with thinking about when we have certain projects, when we have certain commitments, when we have certain values, we love those kinds of things, right? So you can think about, you can tell what a person is a lot of times by what they love. So if you traced back a person's projects or commitments, you find, hey, there's like something that they love and that's why they're involved in. So self is made up of things that we love and are drawn to. If our projects, commitments, or values change, if any core belief or desire changes, then we're not the same person. So that's the criteria that you're looking for when you are thinking about, well, what makes a person the same? A person is the same throughout time if they have the same core commitments. You could think of them like major commitments, long-term projects, things like that. So this might raise a couple of questions for you. And these are questions that I want you to kind of puzzle through in your journals this week. So first, can someone's core desires really change over time? So if you remember, it's been less than a year, probably been 6 months, 7 months, Kanye West came out and released a new album called Jesus is King. And so he described this process of converting to Christianity, and a lot of his values, how he interacted with his wife, how he interacted with basically the media, with his fans, seems to shift. And so there were some people who are like, well, how can this even be a real fit? Did Kanye West actually change? And so that should bring to our minds this question of, can someone's core desires really change over time? So we might say, okay, Noggle, sure. Like, you can say that the self is made up of these projects, commitments, and values, things that we love throughout time, but do those things actually change? Can they really change for a person? So, you know the old adage, people don't change. So you might think, all right, does this way of thinking about what a self is really help us in any way? So you might think, well, maybe this kind of change isn't possible for people, and maybe that's not a worry for Noggle. He's just trying to show, hey, like, if we want to talk about what it is to respect someone's integrity, like, this is the kind of thing about them that you don't want to change. You don't want to try to destroy or undermine their projects, commitments, and values, basically without them knowing it. So our second question is going to be, what does this view imply about how we should approach others when we disagree with them or challenge their core beliefs? So you are going to find people that you disagree with. They're going to have different core political commitments. They're going to have different religious beliefs than you. They're going to have different beliefs about what's valuable. And so those beliefs can seem kind of intractable. And a lot of the times, those three areas, what we value, religious beliefs and political commitments, we get kind of hot about them. We get upset. And so maybe this way of thinking about what a person is insightful to show, hey, well, maybe people are getting upset because they feel that it's close to those things that they hold most valuable. So then what does this view imply about how we should approach others when we disagree with or challenge their core beliefs? So sometimes you might run into someone who tries to play on someone's emotion to get them to change their mind. And so then you wonder, well, if you're trying to undermine someone's self, if you're trying to undermine their integrity, and you're doing it in a way that's kind of manipulative, you might think that that's wrong to do. So it should challenge some of our assumptions about how is it best to convince people. So we are metaphysicians. We're thinking about these questions about what human persons are like. So you might think that, well, what has this got to do with how I treat others? It's got a good bit to do with how do we respect them as persons? They've spent years probably being committed to these values. And it's not that we don't want to disagree with other people or we don't want to challenge their beliefs, because we think these things are important and we have good reasons for why we believe what we believe, or why we think a certain way about things. But maybe knowing that someone's core beliefs are set in a certain direction, we should be careful and respectful how we approach them, how we disagree with them, just to understand that this is a core value for them and we're trying to get them to see our own perspective. So it should help us to be more respectful of other people. Not that we should refrain from giving our reasons, because we also want to be intellectually honest, but we also want to be aware of some of the reasons that people might have for disagreeing with us and seeing maybe why these disagreements run so deep. So these are going to be the questions that you'll be puzzling over in your journal. So I kind of just want you to think about this view. What does it mean to have a self, and what is it to have a core desire? And how does that affect how we treat other people? And how does it affect how we think about how change happens? Can this kind of core value change actually happen? All right, so hopefully I will see you soon, either in Zoom or in another lecture. And thanks for your participation in the class, and keep up the